I'm research associate in the Department of Plant Sciences, but I'm a mathematical modeler by training and by trade. And I worked on quite a big range of biological and epidemiological modeling problems. And I'm quite interested in stochastic, spatial explicit models and parameter estimation. So today I'm going to talk about locust modeling and how it came up. I will just show in my slides. So you can see my screen. So locusts are one of the most devastating pests for agricultural and pastoral production because they have high mobility and sensational appetite. And if 2020 would be remembered as the year of COVID, actually in different universe, most probably that would have been the year of locusts, because the end of 2018 started with very big outbreak of locusts, which spanned from India to Kenya. So we've got involved in this project in the mid of 2020, and when I say we, it's just, so I'm working in epidemiology and modeling group led by Professor Chris Gilligan, and actually the group has quite expertise in different pests and diseases of plants, also in different geographical areas. And I think David Godding talked about cassava modeling some few months ago. So when I'm not working on locust, I'm working on banana benchtop virus modeling. And one of the most relevant modeling pathosystems is weed stripe and weed stem, which basically was inspiration behind desert locust modeling. So I've been involved in many different projects, but I think that locust modeling is one of the hardest because the locusts are in the league of their own. So this is just basic project workflow, and project involved a lot of collaborators, and it was new to me and new to the group and new to the Chris. So we spent a lot of time understanding what's happening with this locust and what's happening with data. So this is sort of workflow which is supposed to be iterative, just going round and round and trying to understand. So first of all, understanding desert locust biology. And we were very lucky because we started collaborating with Dr. Keith Cressman from Food and Agriculture Organization, which is Senior Locust Forecasting Officer. No one in the world has the knowledge about locusts that he has. So of course we did the literature review, and most of literature is quite old, as locusts being observed and investigated from biblical times, let's say that. So in terms of data, it's also, it is quite good system of reports and control operation data sets. We were interested in wind trajectories and wanted to understand them. So that from collaboration with Met Office. Marcel Meyers from Hamburg University was interested in visualization and engagement of this information about locust flying and trajectories. So my work involved a lot of looking at remote sensing. And then from modeling formulation, we looked at different aspects. For example, machine learning for breeding suitability, statistical modeling for swarms, landing and reporting, dynamical modeling for development and displacement. So basically that's my work. And then model applications, looking at retrospective analysis and control scenarios. And we are interested in evaluating impact of climate change on locust behavior and future outbreaks. So desert locust has this quite a generic life cycle in comparison to other insects. So females lay eggs, then under appropriate conditions, then eggs develop into hoppers, so small locusts, and then hoppers eat and grow, and in approximately on average 36 days they become adults, and they molt, and they grow. They have the change few pairs of wings, and then they can fly. Then the adults, and then they can mature. And then, if they find the suitable grounds and conditions, they again can lay eggs. But what is sort of different from other is this, that they can have the undergo this metamorphosis, which change, so they can be in two phases, solitarious, so they're just happy locusts, minding their own business, don't like socializing, and other locusts. So they, in hopper stage they are green, and in adult stage they are brown. But then something happens and conditions are good, and there is too many, so density dependent of those locusts, what they become gregarious. So in this case, when they are hoppers, they are black, and then they are adults, they are yellow, and they are really party animals. So they like to group and march together or to fly together, forming swarms. So in my modeling, I'm concentrating only on this gregarious part of their life. So this is biology. So it was very important for us to understand what how reporting works. And I think FAO and Keith had quite a good collection of data reporting tools. And these are just few of the main. So there is this Locust 3, which is basically planchette tablet, which is connected to satellites. So it's collecting real-time data. Locust 3G is sort of mobile type of device, which also is connected to satellite, but it just can send basic data. So in planchette, you can enter lots of environment data when you are reporting the size of swarms and so on. But what was new is that during this outbreak, Plant Village introduced this mobile app called Locust 3M to introduce this sort of crowdsourcing data collection during the outbreaks. So another is aerial surveillance, is done via software called Earth Ranger by a company 51 Degrees. So they are flying and they actually collecting data from air. And there is manual entrance, which is just if someone calls, and in the system, they just put it manually. So I looked at the reporting during the 2019-2020, and at different types of reporting. So trained professionals are those which use those planches or Garmin tools, then crowdsourcing, then other, and aerial. And you can see by the numbers, so this is in log scale, that crowdsourcing is overwhelmed. So the largest data in reporting is from crowdsourcing in Kenya, reporting absences, and there are more than 100,000 of the reports. And when looking at the data, it also was interesting to see that there is this effect of day of a week, where we can see in Kenya, crowdsourcing is reduced by 30% on weekends for presence, and almost 50% on the weekend for absence of desert locusts. And just to say that, okay, different types of locusts, so swarms are gregarious adults, bands are gregarious hoppers, and adult groups, adults, hoppers, hopper groups are solitarious locusts. So this also gives us a possibility to look at the geographical distributions between different type of platforms. For example, this shows 10 by 10 kilometer grid cells, which had reports from both crowdsourcing and aerial platform. And this shows differences. So areas which get only one of the platforms, so in this case, certain, for example, certain areas were reported presence of locusts only by crowdsourcing. One of the advantages of crowdsourcing could be to use this as an early warning system. So to have some idea if that worked as early warning system, we came up with this analysis where we divided into 100 by 100 kilometer grid cells, and we looked at the times where it would be reports from different platforms, but within 7 days. And then again, there's no any reports for at least 30 days. And looked if difference between reporting in crowdsourcing and reporting in other platforms. And we found that on average, actually crowdsourcing was later than other platforms. And when we looked if there was difference when those reports occurred, and we couldn't see any differences in comparison if that was early in a upsurge of locust or later. However, when we look geographically, we can see that there are certain regions which benefited from crowdsourcing as early warning systems. So that's in figure C. And those mostly are at the border. I guess people were expecting something to happen and they were on alert. So another aspect is to understand what are the biases in data, and what we found that it was a very strong effect on distance to the roads on reporting activity. So this is work done by my colleague, statistician Daniel Bonnery. And here, for example, in Kenya for crowdsourcing, there is 5 to 10 times more likely to have a report at 1 kilometer in comparison to 10 kilometers. And just small illustration, this is the locations of reports, and you can see black lines show roads, and it's a lot of reporting close to roads. So also because this crowdsourcing platform, Plant Village, Locust 3M, required that they have you need to have unique username, so we could track profiles of individual reporters. So this shows just reporting activity history of one particular individual. So we see a number of reports, type of reports, dates of reports from February 2020 to May 2021. So when we can get some statistics from there, for example, date of first report, duration, which we define as number of days between first and last report, total number of reports, number of days reporting, we can extract what was the area they had reports in. And then activity ratio is number of days reporting divided by the duration. So basically what is the fraction of days they went and had the report. And then we have proportional present reports of those. So out of all reports, what was when they reported that it was the locusts were present. So characteristics of crowdsourced behavior. So on average, it was quite different. Kenya was quite different because we had a number of active days. It was 6 or 7 on average in Ethiopia and Somalia, and 22 days in Kenya, and confidence intervals also were quite higher. So when we look at aggregated individual characteristics, so for example, in figure A, you can see number of days reporting versus number of reports, and on log 10 scale, and actually it increased. There is very similar rate for both 3 countries. However, when we looked at duration of reporting versus activity ratio, we found that overall activity ratio decreased when duration increased, and that is reasonable because it's very hard to be interested and active if you're doing it very long. However, we noticed these different sort of peaks in the middle, which intrigued, and I looked more carefully in the data, and that's what some of crowdsourcing literature, they call it transient reporters. So basically people who register and try to do reporting for a few days and they just give up. So if I divide all reporters into those which had less than 10 reports and more than 10, then I have 2 nice decreasing curves. But what was quite surprising to find out is this distribution in C, where we plotted area used where reports came from by number of days reporting. And you can see that on average, Kenya has very different behavior. So in Ethiopia and Somalia, you would expect that longer, more days people are reporting larger area they can cover. But in Kenya, it was pretty constant, and on average didn't depend on number of days reporting. So another interesting characteristic is a fraction of presence reports. So if they are reporting mostly that they saw locusts, or they reporting they didn't see locusts, and it was sort of aggregated into clusters for all countries. So either most of the people report that they have seen or they haven't seen. But for example, in Kenya, 60% of reporters reported only that they haven't seen any locusts. And then, of course, because it was for a long time in E and F, we plotted this as a day of fast report. So then people engage into crowdsourcing. And at least in Kenya, you can see 3 big waves of reporting. And earlier, people were registered in the system and started using the app. More likely, they visited larger areas in Kenya, and especially, and then it was more likely that they would report presence of locusts. So another aspect, it was this, we noticed is excessive reporting in crowdsourced data. So we plotted just cumulative composite distribution function, and we found that this sort of power type relationship between number of reports and for Kenya and Somalia, and especially for Kenya, we have this long tail. So when we plotted cumulative percentage contribution, so we ranked all of our reporters according to their number of reports, from the highest reporters to lowest. We found that 20% of the reporters reported about between 60 to 80% of all reports. And then we looked at those 4 top reporters, which had more than 1,000 reports. But we found that, most of these reports either absence, and observer 1 had 148 reports in one day, which were very closely collocated. So now we looked at the data, understanding, what's happening in terms of biology and in terms of the reporting, which are very necessary part if you want to do any modeling and parameter estimation. Now I can go and introduce, oh yeah, I forgot. So another part of my work was to look at the control operations. And this has been now published in this book, in special issue on how to manage migratory pests and potential food crisis. So in this paper, just again, we looked at the regional differences on control operations. So briefly, what is interesting here, so it's a wider analysis incorporating East Africa, Middle East, and Eastern region, where Eastern region was Pakistan, India, Nepal, and Iran. And that geographically was determined by what traditionally how FAO were looking at the movements of the locusts. So in this case, in East Africa, you can see there is this increase in number of aerial control operations. And a lot of was unknown in the system, what kind of control were used. So what was interesting for us is to understand what type of the land cover and what type of crops are happening in those areas which were controlled. And in this case, we found that, for example, 45% of all aerial controls in East Africa were done on shrubs. And overall, 95% would be in bare vegetable vegetation, shrubs, croplands, or herbaceous vegetation. So then we looked at this at very fine cropland fraction distribution maps and rangeland maps, and looked only at those grid cells 1 by 1 kilometer which had control operations reported, and to see at which extent control occurs at cropland and rangeland. And we found that about 13% of grid cells had cropland fraction larger than 0.7, and 14% of rangeland larger than 0.7. So it's not much, but still it gives some idea what's happening in terms of where locusts actually are and then where they are controlled. And so for those grid cells, which high percentage of croplands, we looked at map span, distribution of particular crops production, to see which crops are at highest risk. And we found that for East Africa, it was sugarcane, sorghum, other roots, and then maize and wheat. So yes, so it was important to understand data and biology. And now I'm coming at last to my forecasting model. So because we're epidemiologists, we like everything to do with sort of compartmental modeling framework. And so I'm not looking at each individual locus because there are just millions and millions of those. So my unit is this unit of large group of locusts which are at the similar stages. So from locust life cycle, we have these different compartments. So I have eggs, hoppers, immature adults, and mature adults. And the transition from one compartment to another occurs according to very complicated rules. And immature adults and mature adults differ only that immature adults care only finding food, while mature adults care finding food and finding suitable ground to breed. And I'm using, so this is a spatial explicit model, and the landscape is 1 by 1 kilometer, and it depends on static layers, which don't change, and then I have dynamic layers, which very important is NDVI, is normalized differential vegetation index. So I'm using one derived from MODIS satellites, precipitation, soil moisture, and of course, Met Office named trajectories. So first of all, it is important to understand where there are potential breeding areas. So for this, we use machine learning approach, and we use some just static covariates. It's a percentage of clay, percentage of sand at 10 centimeters, and elevation, and used historical data of hopper presence and absence to derive this suitability map. So once there is area suitable, next step is to see if there is enough soil moisture and participation before egg laying. So that is the part of the model where from adults we go to eggs. So for egg development, it is very nicely defined dependence between temperature and percentage developed. So it takes between 2 weeks to a month for depending on suitable temperatures, and if it's in a range of temperatures. And once the eggs hatch, what is important for hoppers is just to have enough food. And to determine if there's enough food, I just look at the smoothed NDVI values and check if there is there is some peak, which means that vegetation peaked during their lifespan when they were developing, or at least if we have nice increase in NDVI, because increase in NDVI means that there is a fresh vegetation occurring, and actually locusts really like fresh vegetation. So this another very important aspect is name wind trajectories, and I think I've seen Will here, Thurston, who I'm very grateful, who provided this. So these are based on 3D meteorological Met Office numerical weather prediction model. So exactly the same one which use for weather prediction, but only that part which determines how atmospheric air moves around. So here, Will provided me with 1,000 individual trajectories. So that's what is also exciting about our application of name trajectories, that we have these individual trajectories where particles could move from a certain point. So I have grid 10 by 10 kilometers with 1,000 individual realizations of trajectories, and I have data for 2 years. And these are just examples from certain initial points for 2 different days. And you can see sort of what's happening in this scale about this global wind movement. And the main aspect of the modeling is that the locust mobility is induced by wind. So we know how they could move, but another aspect is to determining what's happening on the ground. So let's say they move somewhere, and how long they will stay. It depends on this feeding capacity. So I looked at different literature and different profiles of NDVI and came up with this scheme. So there are 3 aspects which determine what's happening on the ground. So there is land cover, and I'm using Copernicus classification. So I divide it in sparse vegetation, shrubs. It also include other types of vegetation like herbaceous vegetation and so on. So there are a lot of forest divisions, but I use just everything in one forest type and cropland. So once I know what type of vegetation, then I look at the NDVI profiles, which I also use Whittaker smoother to have them smooth, and I determine what is the trend. So if NDVI is increasing, is the same or decreasing, and I look at actual values of NDVI, and I divide it into these different classes from lowest density and highest density. And depending on these 3 factors, then locusts can stay. Okay, if they don't belong, if they belong to something which is not here, so they don't stay, they just fly next day. Otherwise, short stay is just from 1 to 2 days, medium stay is from 2 to 4 days, and long stay from 4 to 7 days. So these are different aspects of the model. And once it's done, and so this is how the model output looks like. So this is just one particular life history of locusts. So each numbered point shows location when they were on the ground. So everything starts at location 1. That eggs were laid on September 2020. So that means that at this particular point, it was high probability of breeding, so suitable for breeding location, and it was some precipitation before eggs were laid. So it was good conditions and good temperature for them to hatch, and once they hatched, hoppers were subjected to this NDVI, which is pretty nice value in increasing, so they had enough food. And once they grow, what happened, they then just fly from 1 to 2. So I just sampled a single trajectory from those provided by name. And then at each point, I check with my algorithm how long they would stay. And in this particular pathway of locusts, you can see that they mostly been in shrubland or bare and sparse vegetation, and not much of the cropland have been visited. So I also can simulate forecasting in my simulation, just mimicking what would actually be happening on the ground. So if I look at they are flying from location 3 to location 4, and someone at this red point saw them flying and reported. So basically what we have is just this one single point upon report. But what I can do, I can sample from larger area, plus minus 3 degrees, different points and different trajectories. So I sample 10,000 points and one trajectory for each point. But I keep only those trajectories which were within 5 kilometers of my reporting point. because actually we don't know locations of 3 or 4, so we don't know where these swarms came from or where they're going, but we know that someone saw them at this red point. And this is just particular 82 trajectories where they could initiate it and they could end it, which the model gives me as a forecast. Now I can look at where those trajectories end and see what type of land cover they could end. So these are sort of potential landing areas. And in this case, we again see that it's nothing that much interesting, but shrubs and sparse vegetation. I can go in further and try and then run my model for a week and to see what's happening. So blue, but my initial simulation, which I assume my real trajectory. So we can see there is quite big variability after a week where they could land, and there is even one point which could be which is in a cropland. So I can repeat that now from different points between 9 and 10, and again run 10,000 sampling points. So for those people who know parameter estimation, it would be similar as approximate Bayesian computation. I just narrowing my number of simulations to those which satisfy my criteria. And then again, I can look what were predicted landing sites and what type of land cover it could be. So again, a lot of shrubs. And so again, I can run it for another few weeks or so and to determine what are the possible landing sites and possible distribution of land cover types. So this was sort of my simulation just to explore what modeling do and to see its capacities. So how does it compare to actual outbreak? So this is my trajectory and 2 observation points and possible inferred trajectories. And that's how it looked in real life. So these are all report locations at a similar time. So I think, so I was very carefully choosing this simulated case. And most probably it could be one of the explanatory trajectories to explain data. But if you look at the data, so again, now I know about reporting. So having a lot of data is nice, but understanding data is important because it's very hard to say how exactly now to say if this trajectory is good or bad, because it's so much reporting going on in actual data. So my summary, so just to say, although it was just that of my slides, I showed that we developed this framework for desert locust dynamics and large scale and high spatial temporal distribution resolution. So from that framework, it has potential to identify areas at high risk from locust invasion and inform surveillance. And it even knowing at least a single observation, but good observation where we are certain that it happened, could really give a lot of information. So at the moment, there's a lot of work ongoing on model validation based on the reports. But as I said, so involvement of the public created this big data set. So if I add all the days which volunteers took reporting, totally it's 580 years of volunteering work. However, it is important to understand how observers behave in order to account for data. And then last but not least, so if we can't trust all of the reports, so what could be our gold standard where locusts actually were observed? And I think that could be control operations, because you don't control if there's no locust, so they definitely were in this place. So using data on control operations, so we identified areas which have been invaded by locusts and are important to agropastoral production. And information on funding, so it was funded by